This is a Channel Africa podcast. You can also get Channel Africa on satellite PAS10, DSTV Audio Bouquet 802, and OpenView Bouquet Channel 628.
It was on this particular day, the 16th of August, way back in 2012, when the South African Police Service opened fire on a crowd of striking mine workers at Marikana in the Northwest Province. The police killed 34 mine workers and left 78 seriously injured. The tragic event culminated after an intense week-long protest in which the miners were demanding a wage increase at the Lonmin Platinum Mine in a wildcat strike. Following the open fire assault, 250 of the miners were arrested, but this burning question of who gave the order to fire those deadly shots still remains, as the families of the deceased miners still struggle to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. Let's talk about this further now. I'm joined on the line by Dr. Pedro Mzileni, a sociology lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of the Free State here in South Africa. Good evening, Dr. Mzileni, and welcome to Africa Tonight.
Good evening to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us this evening as we reflect back on the darker chapter of South Africa's history. 11 years on, Doctor, what can you tell us about your reflections of this day, the 11th anniversary of the Marikana Massacre? What comes to mind?
Well, what comes to mind is that the legacy of racial capitalism in South Africa and across the continent is still very much alive, because as you would know that the workers that were killed in Marikana, most of them come from the province of the Eastern Cape, but there are also those who came from Swaziland and also Lesotho. For instance, Sitelega Gadlela was one of the miners who was shot on the day. He was 50 years old. He originates from Swaziland. And also Janeveke Liao, who was 47 years old. He originates from Lesotho. So the people who died there, most of them were young people. They were all men, but they come from poor regions of the country and Southern Africa, because historically they were dispossessed of the land, and they have no other means to survive other than to sell their labor in the mines, in the factories and the farms that are owned by white monopoly capital. So, and that legacy is still very much alive today, because the people who go underground to be mine workers, the people who are domestic workers, the people who sweep the streets, the people who clean the toilets, today, not 10 years ago, not 100 years ago, today, not only in South Africa, but across the world, the people who do those demeaning jobs remain being black people, you know. So they were massacred in 2012 in defense of the platinum mine that is owned by a British corporation called Lonmin. And as we would know, platinum makes jewelry. It is responsible for car parts, for trucks, for trains, and so on. But all that wealth, my brother, makes all those resources, infrastructure, and wealth for Britain and for the European Union. The people in Marikana are poor. The people in South Africa are poor. They don't benefit from the platinum in Marikana at all. So as we reflect 11 years later, we remember that Marikana illustrated to us the extent to which the system of racial capitalism is still very much alive, and also the legacy of dispossession reproduces the structural violence where they ended up being killed in cold blood by the police of the South African Police Service, mandated by the ANC government to defend the profits of this British corporation in South Africa. So that's what we remember 11 years later.
But according to the chief executive of Sibanye Stillwater, which took over Lonmin after a year, the Marikana massacre happened, progress is being made in terms of the upliftment of the lives of mine workers, saying that the company's community upliftment project put it on the right side of history. Do you share this sentiment, Doctor?
Not at all, because Sibanye Stillwater is another company that has replaced Lonmin, but Sibanye Stillwater is listed in the London Stock Exchange, just like Lonmin. It's also listed in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, where it rakes in billions and trillions of rands in profits. It is evading its responsibility of paying appropriate taxes. It is also paying the workers a wage that does not relate to the type of profits that they make. In fact, the CEO of Sibanye is a multimillionaire who makes millions in income, not per month, but per week. Yet the workers remain poor. The community of Marikana is not benefiting from the platinum. Sibanye has not built any form of infrastructure, housing, or any kind of development to the community of Marikana. In fact, as we speak today, the claims that were being submitted by the children and the widows of the victims of Marikana, not all of them are completed. They are still waiting for those claims even today. In fact, even the money that they have been given is insufficient for the amount of loss that they suffered in the Marikana massacre, because you can never replace a life, So all these issues that are in place, it does not mean that simply because Lonmin with a British name has left, and therefore you replace it with Sibanye that has a black name, and therefore the conditions of black workers are going to change. No, the system of exploitative racial capitalism in the mining industry remains in place, and it remains exploitative towards black workers. Whether the company is fronting itself as a white company or a black company, the system of exploitation remains in place.
But every year, Doctor, we dip our banner. We remember the fallen mine workers, Doctor. But when are we going to begin to see justice being served? Because the families of the victims continue to fight for justice, for the victims who were murdered at the hands of the police. When are we going to see some progress being made in terms of holding those responsible for the killings accountable for the massacre?
That's a good question. And I just want to take back the listeners to the fact that after the Marikana massacre occurred, a commission of inquiry was appointed to investigate what took place on the 16th of August in 2012. Maybe just to remind people who are unfamiliar also with law, so that we break down and simplify these terms for them. Commissions of inquiries are appointed to interpret, a point of crisis, especially a point of crisis that gives the nation a deep sense of pain, So commissions of inquiries are there to resolve a national contradiction. They are sort of a response to a national calamity, especially a complex problem. So we set up commissions to establish and understand the scope of the problem, In other words, commissions don't produce solutions in themselves, but rather they enable us to understand the depth of the problem, especially a traumatic event. Now, in that commission, terms of reference were written in that commission, and one of the stipulated terms of reference there was that the commission must stipulate the mandate and recommend prosecution for the people who committed the crimes in Marikana. And as you would know, the institution that is now given the mandate to prosecute is the NPA, the National Prosecuting Authority, and it is given that power by Section 179 in the Constitution. But now, here's the key part. It is the directors of the NPA who must make a decision about whether to prosecute or not, according to the recommendations that they receive from the commission. Now, two things that South Africans are waiting for is the prosecution of the police that shot those mine workers, the prosecution of Ramaphosa, who applied pressure on ministers to send police into the scene, and then lastly, the prosecution of everyone who owns Lonmin, both the managers who work in South Africa, including the owners and shareholders who are located in Britain. All those people were supposed to be brought to book and be prosecuted for colluding together to kill black mine workers in Marikana. Those three things have not occurred at all, and the directors of the NPA have not accounted to the nation in terms of why are those three specific bodies of people not being prosecuted despite the commission recommending so. Otherwise, all the other legal issues taking place on the periphery of the recommendations of the commission are immaterial in the memory of South Africans.
As you mentioned, the Commission made a number of recommendations, Doctor, for the National Prosecuting Authority to investigate and possibly prosecute, focusing on those who committed the killings rather than those in charge, Doctor. But when you look at the politicization of this issue, are you surprised that this Marikana massacre event has now been politicized by political parties here in South Africa?
I must say there's a difference between politicization and political parties. You know, it will be a huge mistake for us to depoliticize the Marikana massacre. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, in its nature, the Marikana massacre is a political issue, you know, because you have to trace back to issues of colonialism, land dispossession, and apartheid as to why do you have black young people working as mine workers underground, earning poverty wages today. That is a political issue, you know, and it needs the Labour Federation movement, it needs the youth movement, it even needs a revolutionary movement of the day that is supposed to champion those issues on behalf of those workers to fight for a living wage for them. So there's no way you can therefore sit and say the matter must therefore be depoliticized. You would be making a very terrible mistake if we now take the literature of activism in this country into consideration. Now let me come to political parties, which is a different issue from politicization. Political parties operate in South Africa from a paradigm of neoliberalism, whereby they think that all that they have to do is to simply compete with one another as if they are pure commodities. They want to compete in a free market for who must get the most votes at the end of the day, which is a very different function from what a revolutionary socialist democracy is intended to be. A revolutionary socialist democracy, it's about different opinions of different transformative leaders who differ about the direction that the country must take on behalf of its people. But people who come in purely from an American model of being liberal parties, who have absolutely no difference amongst each other, but they just compete on frivolous opinions just for them to occupy seats in parliament and make the most noise. That is the model that I have a problem with, because it is not different from the competition between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, or the competition between Apple and Android. They operate in a free market liberal model where they have nothing to offer substantively about the lives of the people. So the actual political contestations we should focus on are the political contestations that have to do with the actual practical lives of the people of Marikana and how they were killed, and the action that must be taken to make sure that people are held accountable and proper reparations from the profits of mining capital are paid to the victims and the widows of all those comrades who were killed in Marikana. Those are the kinds of contestations from a political rigor that I expect concerning Marikana, not games about people's lives, because this is a very serious matter.
The report, Doctor, also suggested a number of recommendations regarding the future of policing of protests. From your vantage point, Doctor, are you getting a sense that the South African Police Service has learned any key lessons from this tragic event in terms of how to handle protests?
Yes, I'm aware of that stipulation in the report and the recommendations of the commission. But let me again simplify it for our listeners so that they understand what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
The Marikana tragedy, my brother, is not purely a legal issue or an issue of law or a matter of how best can we regulate protests. It's not purely a legal issue because at the core of the Marikana massacre was structural violence inherited from the inequalities we have as we are living under racial capitalism. That is at the core of that difference and conflict between workers and the owners of mining companies in Marikana. So it's a structural, economic, political issue at the core. The protest now, where the law comes in, is a secondary matter that requires now another level of engagement. Of course, when you engage in a protest, which is enabled by the Constitution, you must ensure that you use just means to advance justice, because once you use unjust means, you are going to illegitimize the genuine demands of why you are protesting. It's the very same issue that you are fighting also in universities, where students protest in universities and universities call police because they accuse students of being violent. But if you trace at the core of the problem, you'd find that at the core of the problem, it is because education remains commodified in South Africa. It is not free. And poor students who come from poor families, they always struggle to survive in universities without comprehensive funding. Mm-hmm. That is at the core of the problem, and that is a political, economic, and social problem that must be resolved. The legal issue of the problem is a secondary matter. And in fact, you will always struggle to resolve protests with a legal paradigm, so long as we do not resolve the core problem, which is a political, economic problem.
Mm-hmm. Others are now calling on government, Doctor, to declare the 16th of August a national holiday. Do you concur with this view?
Yes, I think 16 August should be renamed as Marikana Day, or a labor Marikana Day in South Africa, or the Day of Mine Workers. But it must be named in a manner that will make us remember what happened on the 16th of August in 2012. As you would know, we have a very bad history in this country of naming public holidays badly, in a manner that decontextualizes them from what actually happened. For instance, 21 March is called a Human Rights Day, which does not reveal the fact that white people killed more than 69 black people in Sharpeville on the 21st of March in 1960. 16th of June is called Youth Day, which does not reveal that white people killed black children who were protesting for free education and for the dismantling of the apartheid regime on the 16th of June in 1976. Hector Peterson was 13 years old. He was a child. He was killed by the white police, and that's how sick the regime is. That's how sick the white regime is. Mm-hmm. But when you go to 16th of June, you even forget that black children were being killed by white people on this day, because it is renamed in a neutral name that does not reflect the suffering of black people in the hands of white people. Mm-hmm. So when we rename the 16th of August, we've got to give it a proper name that makes us remember what happened on the 16th of August. But I can tell you now, under this government, they will never allow 16th of August to be declared a public holiday, because it is going to keep reminding them of the crimes that they committed on innocent black people as the ANC government. So I think it will take maybe a government of the near future where that day has to be remembered, because that day was a huge tragedy of pain that must be cemented in the memory of South Africans, that the struggle for economic freedom, the struggle for land expropriation, not compensation, the struggle for the ownership of the mines and the wealth of this country by black people is something that must happen, and must happen urgently. Marikana must keep reminding us that that struggle remains in session.
Are you confident, are you optimistic, Doctor, that next year, when the country marks 12th anniversary of Marikana Massacre, there will have been progress made with regard to the issues that you have highlighted?
I don't think so, because majority of ministers, members of the ANC in the National Executive Committee, the president himself, and many other former ministers who were involved when this tragedy happened, most of them are shareholders in these British companies who own mining capital in South Africa. So I don't expect them to hold their own handlers accountable. I don't expect Turkey to make a wish for Christmas. You can't wish for your own collapse. So it will have to take a different government to come in and then go back and turn the script to the Marikana page, hold the people accountable the way they're supposed to be held accountable, send everyone who's supposed to go to prison, and then reverse the wealth back to black South Africans. It will be a different government that will do that work. This one currently is in the pockets of British capital. It won't be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. It is 29 minutes after the hour, 10 p.m. Central African Time. If you have just joined us tonight, I am in conversation with Dr. Pedro Mzileni, a sociology lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of the Free State in South Africa. We are reflecting back on the killing of 34 mine workers way back in 2012 in Marikana in South Africa's northwest province, otherwise known as the Marikana Massacre, a darker chapter in South Africa's history. Now, Dr. Pedro Mzileni, just as we wrap up our conversation, any last word, any parting shot that you would like to leave with us?
No, my parting shot is just to remind all the listeners across the continent that simply because freedom or independence is declared, it does not mean that the colonizer has left. It does not mean that the system has changed, because you might have new black people now coming into the system to create the illusion that the system has changed. But when you look at how it operates institutionally, how it operates structurally, it remains the old colonial system that keeps to see black people as animals who must either be paid peanuts or who must be killed if they protest for their rights. Mm-hmm. So the message for all Africans is that we must continue the struggle to fight for our freedom. And this struggle, my brother, is going to be the difficult one because the enemy now is no longer physical. We can no longer point at it. Apartheid now and colonialism are hiding in the media. They are hiding in knowledge. They are hiding in policies and the laws. They are hiding in the media. They are also even hiding in the minds of our people. Our people are mentally enslaved indirectly in a manner that they do not even comprehend. So the struggle now for epistemic freedom is a struggle now that we must wage even more radically, because that will be a very difficult struggle to win. And once we win that struggle, it is only then we will restore our humanity as Africans to take ownership and be a self-reliable people on our own land.
Mm-hmm. But what kind of a dynamic, Doctor, does the upcoming election here in South Africa, which is highly anticipated, what kind of a dynamic does it add to the whole debate of Marikana Massacre and the elusive justice?
The election is not going to redefine or give us anything significant concerning Marikana, because across all the parties who are so interested in this question of the coalition, none of them are interested in resolving the fundamental problem of racial capitalism that continues to haunt us today as black people, So the elections next year, white British capital actually is watching these elections because they are so interested of who is going to be in power, and if it is a coalition, they'll have a stronger control on what happens in South Africa. Because remember, the Oppenheimer British capital is always hands-on and interested whenever South Africa is about to go through a political transition. So in 1993, this is the exact attention they were paying in South Africa. 2023, they are paying the exact attention again because they want to control how the transition is going to happen. So the coalitions that are going to take place next year, it's very important for them to be black and be more on the left. Those are the coalitions that we need if we are to resolve the fundamental problem concerning Marikana. Viewers will know what I'm saying when I say the fundamental coalition we're looking for should be black and be on the left.
Yeah. And of course, what transpired earlier, Doctor, in terms of the coalitions that you are talking about, is anything to go by. We are in for some very interesting times come next year, isn't it? But let me thank you tonight, Doctor, for making yourself available as we talk about this all-important issue. Thank you so much for being with us. It has been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, my brother, and thank you also to your listeners.
That podcast was courtesy of Channel Africa, the African Perspective.